Ethan Carter crouched behind a jagged rock, his breath steady despite the chaos around him. The alien prison stood tall in the distance, a fortress of dark metal and glowing red lights. The night sky above was filled with distant explosions, evidence of the ongoing war between the Zerithian Empire and their rivals, the Draxian Coalition. His mission was simple: infiltrate the prison, find Princess Soraya, and get her out. But things were never as easy as they sounded. Ethan checked his gear, his plasma cutter, a stolen security pass, and a compact pulse rifle he had scavenged from a dead alien patrol. He had only one chance. The fortress had the latest technology, but humans had something better: adaptability. He had studied their patterns, their weaknesses. They relied too much on their machines, never expecting someone to think differently. He moved swiftly, using the shadows to his advantage. His stolen pass worked just long enough to get him inside the outer walls before the alarms would detect the forgery. From there, he took out 2 guards silently, disabling their communication implants before they could alert anyone. He reached the detention chamber, a heavily secured section with reinforced energy barriers. Inside, behind a shimmering force field, stood Princess Soraya. Ethan had seen pictures of her before: long silver hair, deep violet eyes, and the elegant features of Zerithian royalty. But in person, she was even more striking. Despite being a prisoner, she stood tall, calm, and composed, as if she had already won the game before it started. She turned her head slightly, her gaze sharp as she spoke in perfect Terran standard. "You're not Draxian," she said. "You're human." Ethan didn't waste time. Soraya entered, wearing a different outfit, royal Zerithian robes, flowing and decorated with intricate golden patterns. She no longer looked like a prisoner. She looked like a ruler. Ethan's jaw tightened. "What did you do to me?" Soraya stepped closer, her expression calm. "A neural suppression field," she said. "Temporary. You will regain movement soon." Ethan glared at her. "You set me up." She tilted her head slightly. "I did not lie to you. You were sent to rescue me, and you succeeded. Then why the hell am I here?" His voice was sharp. Soraya sat down on a floating chair beside him, her hands resting on her lap. "Because by the laws of my people, you now belong to me." Ethan's body tensed, but he still couldn't move. "What are you talking about?" She studied him for a moment before answering. "In Zerithian culture, when someone of royal blood is saved, they are forever bound to their rescuer, unless the rescuer is not of noble birth. In that case, the roles are reversed." Ethan felt his heart pound. "You're saying, because I saved you, I'm your prisoner?" Soraya shook her head. "Not a prisoner, a royal thrall." Ethan laughed bitterly. "That's just a fancy word for slave." Her gaze darkened for a second before she stood up. "We do not see it that way. To serve the royal bloodline is considered the highest honor in our empire." Ethan clenched his fists as he slowly felt control returning to his body. He flexed his fingers, testing his strength. "Well, guess what? I'm human, and humans don't follow your laws." Soraya smiled faintly. "You are in my empire now, Ethan Carter. Human laws do not matter here." He pushed himself into a sitting position, his muscles still weak. "And what if I refuse?" Her expression didn't change. "Then you will live the rest of your life in confinement." Ethan exhaled sharply, his mind racing. He had fought in wars, survived impossible missions, and escaped death more times than he could count. But this was something entirely different. He needed information. He needed time. "So what now?" he asked. Soraya walked toward the door, but stopped before leaving. "Now, you will be tested." Ethan frowned. "Tested for what?" She looked back at him, her eyes unreadable. "To see if you are worthy." The door closed behind her, leaving Ethan alone. The thrall's trial. Ethan wasn't given much time to recover. Within an hour, 2 Zerithian guards entered, tall, armored warriors with silver skin and piercing golden eyes. They carried no weapons, but their presence alone was intimidating. "You will follow," one of them said in a deep mechanical voice. Ethan stood, his body still aching but functional. He considered fighting, but it was pointless. He needed to understand what Soraya was planning first. They led him through a massive hallway, lined with golden banners displaying Zerethian symbols. Other aliens watched him with curiosity, whispering in their own language. Finally, they reached a circular chamber. At its center was a glowing platform. Soraya stood at the far end, her hands folded behind her back. Beside her was an older Zerethian, his face scared and his gaze sharp. "This is Grandmaster Vaylor," Soraya said. "He will oversee your trial." Ethan smirked. "And what happens if I fail?" Vaylor answered in a rough voice. "Then you will never leave this ship again." Ethan stepped forward, his instincts sharpening. "Let's get this over with." Vaylor smiled grimly. "As you wish, human." The platform beneath Ethan flashed, and suddenly the floor vanished. Ethan plummeted into darkness. Ethan's body twisted as he plummeted into darkness. Cold air rushed past his face, and for a moment, he felt completely weightless. Then, BM. He landed hard on a rough surface. His knees bent instinctively, absorbing the impact. His head snapped up. He was no longer in the grand hall. A massive chamber stretched around him, its walls made of dark stone that shimmered with faint blue light. Strange, glowing symbols covered the ground, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. The air was thick and heavy, making every breath feel like an effort. Then, a deep metallic voice echoed through the chamber. "The trial begins." Ethan spun around, scanning his surroundings. He had no weapon, no armor, just his wits and instincts. He had survived worse. He just had to figure out the rules of this game. A door of light appeared at the far end of the chamber. It looked like an exit, but Ethan wasn't foolish enough to think it would be that easy. Then the ground trembled. From the shadows, 3 hulking figures stepped forward. Their bodies were made of black metal, their eyes glowing red. They weren't organic, they were some kind of war machines, and they were coming straight for him. The fight for survival. Ethan had seconds to react. The first machine lunged at him, its massive fist swinging like a hammer. He ducked just in time, feeling the air crack as the metal fist slammed into the ground. He didn't stop moving. The second machine attacked next, spinning like a blade, its sharp arms slicing toward him. Ethan rolled to the side, barely dodging as sparks flew where the blade scraped the stone floor. His mind worked fast. These things were strong, but were they smart? He had to test them. He ran toward the third machine, forcing it to react. As expected, it charged at him, but Ethan waited until the last second and jumped aside. The machine couldn't stop its momentum. It slammed straight into the second one. A loud crash echoed through the chamber as the 2 machines tangled together. Ethan grinned. They weren't smart. They were just programmed to attack. That gave him an advantage. The first machine was already coming for him again, its fist glowing with red energy. This time, Ethan didn't dodge. Instead, he waited, watching, calculating. At the last moment, just before the fist struck, Ethan jumped onto the machine's arm and used its own momentum to launch himself onto its back. The machine struggled, but Ethan held on tight. His eyes searched for a weakness, a panel, an exposed wire. There, a small energy core was visible at the base of its neck. Without hesitation, Ethan punched it with all his strength. The machine shook violently, sparks flying from the damaged core. Then, with a final groan, it collapsed. 1 down, 2 to go. A deadly escape. The remaining 2 machines recovered quickly and turned their attention to Ethan. He had no more time to play tricks. He had to get to that door of light before they cornered him. He sprinted across the chamber, dodging their attacks as metal fists crashed around him. The door was just ahead. But then, the floor split open beneath him. Ethan barely managed to grab onto the edge as a deep chasm appeared below. Looking down, he saw nothing but endless darkness. If he fell, he was done for. The two machines approached, their red eyes glowing. One of them raised its arm cannon, preparing to fire. Ethan acted on instinct. Using his strength, he swung his legs up and launched himself over the first machine's head. The sudden movement confused them for a second. Just enough time for Ethan to run. The door of light was right there. Ethan dove through it. For a moment, he felt weightless again, like before. The world around him blurred and shifted, and then he was back. The trial chamber was gone. Instead, he stood in a grand throne room, breathing heavily. Soraya and Grandmaster Valor were watching him from above, their expressions unreadable. Ethan wiped the sweat from his forehead. "That was fun," he muttered sarcastically. Soraya stepped forward, her violet eyes locked onto his. "You passed the first test," she said, "but you are not free yet." Ethan sighed. "Of course not." Ethan stood in the grand throne room, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. The trial had pushed him to his limits, but he had survived. That should have meant freedom, but Soraya's cold gaze told him otherwise. The alien princess stepped forward, her violet eyes locked onto him. "You passed the first test," she said, "but you are not free yet." Ethan let out a frustrated sigh. "Of course not. There's always more, isn't there?" Grandmaster Valor, the towering alien figure who had first declared Ethan a prisoner, nodded solemnly. "You have proven your strength, human. But strength is not enough." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Then what do you want from me?" Soraya hesitated for the briefest moment, then lifted her hand. A small holographic device activated, projecting a swirling mass of stars and planets into the air. Ethan immediately recognized the map. It was a star map. But something was wrong. One section of space was dark, empty, completely lifeless. Soraya's voice was quiet but firm. "This is what remains of my home." Ethan's expression shifted. He hadn't expected that. What happened? The princess clenched her fists. The Dominion. The name sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He had heard of them before. A ruthless empire that conquered entire civilizations. No mercy. No survivors. "They destroyed our world," Soraya continued. "They took our people, enslaved them, and turned our warriors into their weapons. My father, the king, fought until the end." She paused, her voice tight with pain. "He did not survive." Ethan exhaled. He had been through a lot in his life, but he couldn't imagine losing everything like that. Soraya's eyes burned with determination. "The Dominion believes our people are broken, that our empire is finished." She stepped closer. "But we are not. We are rebuilding, gathering strength, and we need warriors, fighters." Ethan's mind put the pieces together. "So, that's why you won't let me go." Valor nodded. "You have shown potential, human. You defeated the first trial. That is rare." Ethan crossed his arms. "And if I refuse?" The Grandmaster's deep voice rumbled. "Then you will remain a prisoner." Ethan frowned. He had fought to escape worse situations before, but something about this felt different. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. If what Soraya said was true, if the Dominion was really out there enslaving entire species, then this was bigger than him. He looked at the star map again, then back at Soraya. "And if I agree?" Soraya's expression softened just a little. "Then you will have your freedom, and you will have a purpose." Ethan sighed. This wasn't how he had expected things to go. But deep down, he already knew his answer. "Fine," he said. "I'm in." A faint smile appeared on Soraya's lips. "Then your real training begins." Ethan stood in the middle of the training arena, surrounded by alien warriors. The air smelled of metal and sweat, and the walls were marked with old battle scars. He had agreed to fight for Soraya's people, but now he faced a new challenge, becoming strong enough to survive. Grandmaster Valor stepped forward, his towering figure casting a shadow over Ethan. "Your strength is impressive for a human," he said, "but strength alone will not be enough against the Dominion." Ethan rolled his shoulders. "Then let's get started." Valor gestured to the side, and an alien warrior stepped forward. The fighter was massive, standing nearly 8 feet tall with thick, armored skin and glowing red eyes. He grinned, cracking his knuckles. "Your first lesson," Valor said, "is learning how to fight when you are outmatched." Ethan barely had time to react before the warrior charged at him like a bull. The first fight. Ethan dodged to the side, barely avoiding the warrior's powerful strike. The air whooshed past his face as the fist missed him by inches, but before he could recover, a massive kick slammed into his stomach, sending him rolling across the ground. He coughed, trying to catch his breath. The warrior laughed. Too slow, human. Ethan gritted his teeth. He had fought before. War fights, mercenary jobs, even a few street brawls. But this was different. His opponent was stronger, faster, and tougher than any human he had ever faced. But Ethan wasn't about to quit. He pushed himself up and charged forward, using his smaller size to dodge between the warrior's legs. As the alien turned, Ethan jumped up and landed a solid punch to the side of his head. The warrior staggered, surprised by the hit. But then he grinned. Not bad. Then he swung his arm like a hammer, and Ethan barely managed to duck. The fight continued, Ethan dodging and striking whenever he could. But no matter how many times he landed a hit, the warrior kept coming. His attacks only seemed to annoy him. Ethan's body ached, his breath came in gasps, and sweat dripped down his face. He wasn't winning this fight. Valor suddenly raised his hand, signaling the battle to stop. The warrior stepped back, grinning. "You last longer than I thought." Ethan wiped his mouth and sighed. "Yeah, well, I learned fast." Valor nodded. "You have potential, but you rely too much on brute force. Against the Dominion, that will get you killed." Soraya, who had been watching from the sidelines, stepped forward. "You need to fight smarter." Ethan glanced at her. "Smarter how?" Soraya pulled out a small device from her belt. She pressed a button, and a holographic image appeared. A Dominion soldier, tall and armored, with glowing energy weapons attached to its arms. "They are stronger than you," she said. "Faster than you. But they are predictable." She gestured toward the warrior Ethan had fought. "You lasted because you adapted. But you didn't use strategy." Ethan exhaled. He hated to admit it, but she was right. If he wanted to survive, he had to fight differently. A new strategy. The next few days were brutal. Ethan trained with the alien warriors, learning how to use speed and agility instead of brute strength. He practiced dodging, counterattacks, and using his opponent's momentum against them. He even started learning alien weapons, blades that hummed with energy, shock batons that could paralyze enemies, and advanced firearms with targeting systems. At first, it was overwhelming. But slowly, Ethan adapted. One evening, Soraya found him practicing alone in the training hall. She watched as he moved through his drills, sweat covering his body. "You're improving," she said. Ethan smirked. "Still not good enough, though." Soraya stepped closer. "Not yet, but you will be." For the first time since he had arrived, Ethan saw something in her eyes. Respect. But before they could say anything else, an alarm rang through the halls. A deep, echoing sound that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He turned to Soraya. "What is that?" Her face hardened. "The Dominion." Ethan clenched his fists. The real fight was about to begin. The alarm's deep echoes filled the halls, sending a wave of tension through the air. Ethan's muscles tensed as he exchanged a quick glance with Soraya. "How many?" she asked, her voice sharp. A soldier ran up, his face pale. "A full Dominion attack force." "They found us." Ethan's heart pounded. They weren't ready. He had barely started mastering their combat techniques, and now the enemy was knocking on their door. Valor appeared, his expression unreadable. "All warriors to battle positions." Then he looked at Ethan. You have trained hard. Now you fight. Ethan nodded. There was no turning back. Preparing for war, the underground base shook as explosions rumbled above. Ethan followed Soraya and Valor to the command room, where a large screen displayed the incoming Dominion forces, black armored soldiers, towering war machines, and hovering ships with heavy cannons. Soraya clenched her fists. They came in force. Valor nodded. We will not survive a direct battle. Ethan studied the map. Then let's not fight them directly. Everyone turned to him. He pointed to the narrow canyon that led to their base. This is our only way in and out, right? Soraya nodded. Yes. Why? Ethan smirked. We make it a death trap. The ambush. The warriors moved fast, setting up explosives and barricades along the canyon walls. Meanwhile, Ethan and Soraya took positions on a high ridge overlooking the battlefield. The Dominion forces advanced. Their black armored soldiers marched in perfect formation, their glowing weapons ready. Massive four-legged war machines stomped forward, scanning for threats. Ethan took a deep breath. This was it. Now, Soraya shouted. A massive explosion rocked the canyon, sending shockwaves through the enemy ranks. Rocks collapsed from above, crushing soldiers and blocking the path forward. Then, the warriors attacked. Arrows with energy tips rained down, piercing Dominion armor. Blasters fired from hidden positions. Ethan grabbed his own weapon, a modified alien rifle, and took aim. He fired at one of the Dominion officers, hitting him square in the chest. The soldier stumbled, but his armor absorbed most of the damage. They were tough. Ethan adjusted his aim and shot at the exposed joint of the officer's armor. This time, the blast pierced through, and the soldier collapsed. Soraya smirked. You learn fast. But the Dominion forces were not retreating. Instead, they adapted, using shields and heavy weapons to push forward. A war machine fired a massive energy blast, destroying one of the barricades. Warriors were thrown into the air, their screams filling the battlefield. Ethan clenched his jaw. We need to take that thing down. Soraya nodded. Follow me. Destroying the war machine. Dodging blaster fire, Ethan and Soraya rushed through the battlefield. The war machine loomed ahead, its cannons glowing as it prepared to fire again. Ethan spotted a weak point, a vent on its back. I have an idea. He looked at Soraya. Cover me. Without waiting, he sprinted toward the machine. Dominion soldiers fired at him, but Soraya and the warriors provided cover, picking them off one by one. Ethan climbed onto a fallen Dominion soldier, then jumped onto the machine's leg. Its metal surface was hot, and the vibrations from its movement made it hard to hold on. He climbed higher, reaching the back vent. With one deep breath, he pulled out a small explosive device and jammed it inside. Then he jumped. As he hit the ground, he rolled to absorb the impact. A second later, boom! The war machine erupted in flames, its massive frame collapsing. The Dominion forces hesitated, momentarily stunned. Soraya saw the opportunity. Now, attack with everything we have. Turning the tide, the warriors charge, using the enemy's confusion to their advantage. Ethan grabbed a fallen Dominion weapon and fired at their ranks, taking down another soldier. The battle raged on, but momentum had shifted. The Dominion was pushed back, their numbers thinning. Ethan panted, his body sore and exhausted. But as he looked around, he saw something incredible. They were winning. Valor's voice echoed through the battlefield. Drive them out. Show them that we will never kneel. With a final, coordinated push, the warriors forced the Dominion into retreat. Their ships lifted off, disappearing into the sky. Victory. But at what cost? The battlefield fell silent. The once proud canyon was now a graveyard of fallen warriors and burning wreckage. Ethan turned to Soraya. We did it. She nodded, but her face was grim. For now. Valor approached. They will return. And next time, they will not underestimate us. Ethan exhaled. He knew this was far from over. But one thing was clear. He was no longer just a prisoner. No longer just a human caught in an alien war. He was one of them now. And he was ready to fight. The battlefield still smoldered from the battle. The air was thick with smoke, and the scent of burnt metal lingered. Warriors moved through the wreckage, helping the wounded and recovering weapons. Ethan stood beside Soraya, both exhausted but unwilling to rest. Valor approached them, his expression serious. The Dominion is not finished. They will return, stronger than before. Ethan clenched his fists. Then we finish this before they do. Soraya nodded. We take the fight to them. Valor studied them for a moment, then finally spoke. There is a way. A dangerous plan. Inside the war room, a holographic map displayed the Dominion's main supply base, an orbital station that controlled reinforcements and supplies for their armies. Valor pointed at it. If we destroy this station, the Dominion will lose control over this planet. Ethan studied the layout. But how do we get there? We don't have ships strong enough to break through. Soraya smirked. We do now. She led Ethan outside, where a captured Dominion dropship was being repaired. Its sleek black frame was covered in battle scars, but it was still operational. This is our way in. Ethan grinned. Let's do it. Infiltrating the station. Dressed in stolen Dominion armor, Ethan, Soraya, and a small team of warriors boarded the dropship. As they approached the station, the Dominion's control tower hailed them. Identify yourself. Ethan held his breath as Soraya, using a voice modulator, responded. Squad returning from ground battle. Requesting clearance. There was a pause. Then, permission granted. The ship slid into the docking bay, its doors opening to reveal rows of Dominion soldiers. Ethan and the others walked in formation, keeping their heads low. But as they moved deeper inside, alarms suddenly blared. Intruders detected. Seal the exits. Ethan cursed. They know. Soraya pulled out her weapon. Then we fight. The battle inside. Blaster fire erupted as warriors clashed with Dominion troops. Ethan ducked behind cover, returning fire with precise shots. Soraya moved like a blur, taking down enemies with her energy blades. Valor's voice crackled in their earpieces. Get to the control room. We must overload the reactor. Ethan and Soraya sprinted down the corridors, taking out guards along the way. They'd reached the control room, where a massive reactor pulsed with energy. Soraya typed rapidly on the console, overriding the system. Setting overload sequence. Done. An automated voice echoed. Reactor overload initiated. Evacuate immediately. Ethan turned to Soraya. Time to go. Escape and victory. As they ran back to the ship, the station shook violently. Explosions ripped through the halls, sending debris flying. A Dominion commander blocked their path, his red eyes glowing behind his helmet. You cannot escape. Ethan stepped forward. Watch me. The commander lunged, but Ethan dodged, grabbing a fallen soldier's blade. With one swift strike, he cut through the commander's armor, taking him down. Soraya grabbed his arm. No time for celebration. Let's move. They sprinted onto the dropship. The pilot lifted off just as fire engulfed the station. Through the viewport, Ethan watched the massive explosion consume the station, sending debris scattering through space. The Dominion forces on the planet below saw it too, and without their command center, they retreated. The war was over. A new future. Back at the Warriors' base, celebrations erupted. The once oppressed people cheered, embracing their victory. Valor stood before Ethan, placing a warrior's cloak over his shoulders. You came to us as a prisoner. Now, you are one of us. Soraya smiled at him. You fought for us. You stayed when you could have left. Ethan looked at her, then at the people around him. This planet had become his home, and he was ready to defend it. The end.